still live. So
welcome to episode 232 of Navigating Now. This is an episode on leadership ROI, aligning development programs to business impact. And I'm happy to be your host today, Nicole Deal. We have two individuals on the line here. We have Grift Krembrink, who probably looks familiar to our viewers. He is our Chief Commercial Officer at Thaudium. And we are blessed with Amy Weil's presence. She is the Vice President of the Go-to-Market Enablement and Productivity function within Braze. For those who don't know, Braze is a customer engagement platform based in New York City, and we've been doing some awesome work with them for a few years now, and we're excited to dig a little bit deeper into that with Amy. Welcome.
Thank you.
good to be here.
So good to have both of you on the line. Before we dive into our topic today, Amy, would love for you to share with our viewers, what you do at Braze in your own words, and also how you kind of got connected with Thaudium and started the work with us.
Great. Yeah. Nice to be here with everybody, as you said, and thank you so much for pronouncing my last name correctly. That doesn't happen often, but Amy Weil and I have been at Braze now for about 2.5 years. And my team is responsible for all go-to-market enablement. And for us, go-to-market really is defined as any customer-facing role. So from sales to customer success, global support, a number of other technical roles, our partnerships org. So a pretty wide breadth of folks that we're responsible for enabling within Braze, which is about a 1,700 person company at this point. And yeah, we're responsible for enablement, which is a stretchy word for anyone who's watching this. That's actually in enablement. That can mean so many different things. And so certainly it does for us. It's anything from onboarding our go-to-market employees to ongoing enablement that spans everything across process, product, skills, sales methodology, all of the things. So plenty of work to keep us busy. We also have that productivity piece in our title as well, which obviously implies a bit of how we leverage our suite of go-to-market tools to help our go-to-market folks be more effective, but also kind of implies that we're trying to get better at leveraging data to really assess how we are able to move the needle and help our go-to-market teams be more effective, ramp more quickly, close more deals, support customers better, and keep our customer churn at a minimum. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's great.
Just a few things.
Just a few things.
Quite the list, my gosh. So you've been leading in this high growth environment for quite some time, and we're excited to kind of unpack your experience rolling out such impactful enablement programs within Braze. Grift, I would love for you to kind of share, how did Amy kind of step into your purview, and I guess what was your first impression of each other? Let's go there too. Why not?
Should I start, Amy, and then I can get maybe?
I think I missed that part of your cue because it was a multi-step question, and I had to you on one part of it.
So you would like to share first, so you can set the record straight. Okay.
I won't be shy as your Grift, but I met Grift and was introduced to Thaudium essentially because I came into the beginning of our last fiscal year, not this year, but the year prior, and said, I believe this needs to be the year of the leader. We really need to invest more heavily in our go-to-market leaders and bring people together across functions in a meaningful way and roll out a pretty thoughtful and extensive leadership program. And so I started reaching into my network and talking to people that I knew and thought would be good at pointing me towards good resources. And so I talked to a number of different people, reached out to someone in my network, and essentially he said there was a company that I had in mind that I knew he'd worked with previously. And his comment was something to the effect of, oh, no, don't talk to them. These guys are doing some really cool stuff. Here's Grift, go talk to Grift. And all of us that had a conversation with Grift were pretty quickly, I think it might have taken a couple conversations, Grift, I'm not remembering exactly, but we were sold pretty fast. So we're big fans here, and we've been really happy with the partnership.
Yeah, well, I don't need to set that record straight because that's a pretty glowing review. And our relationship started in LinkedIn DMs. So Yeah, shout out to the LinkedIn inbox for starting the connection. Yeah, it's interesting. I think back to a couple of the first conversations, Amy, you and I had, and like how quickly we aligned on some of the important tenets of doing the type of work we were discussing. At the time, basically the year of the leader meant some kind of like intentional investment in a development program to sort of create like a consistent set of skills and language around leadership within the go-to-market team at Braze. And a couple of things that I think just like, it was clear that we were singing from the same song sheet. One was like actually having curated deep time for these folks to build some of these skills. Like it was not going to be something that was just kind of, hey, we're going to do this for 90 minutes every week and hope that you kind of move the needle as a leader. It's like, no, let's get these people together outside of the business and really have them kind of take that intentional view on becoming a better leader. I think the second thing that we also talked about was just the concept of like mindset shift as it relates to leadership. So like, you're not gonna change your behavior of being a coach until you understand and believe what it takes to be a great coach. And so that concept of mindset shift and what that means in leadership. And then the last piece, I think, that was really exciting when we kind of put it on the table together was like not seeing this as just that one disruptive moment, but seeing it as a journey and giving folks a couple chances to come back together. And I knew when we were all aligned on those three things, like we had to figure out dollars and cents together and we could make it work. And here we are, as many months later, having delivered some really, really impactful programming for folks. So,
yep, and still at it.
You're still at it, which is a good sign, I guess. A good sign.
Great. So I'm curious, Amy, when you say the year of the leader, how is maybe your perspective of like what great leadership looks like now? How has that shifted from maybe when you first got into like your own like people leadership role?
Oof, that's going way back. Well, yeah, I think of it more like, I don't know, I guess my philosophy on leadership is like my first leadership role, actually, I was pretty young and I was a sales leader at the time. And so at that point, I was just trying to figure out how to kind of step into my big blazer every day and pretend that I knew what I was doing. And so I learned a lot through that. But I would say the last, and then I went through a number of years where I was actually an individual contributor in a selling role and then found my way back to enablement, which is something that I did earlier in my career. And partially because I found that being in sales leadership, I didn't feel like I could make the impact, specifically at the place that I was at the time, that I wanted to, and be able to coach and mentor and develop people the way that I wanted to. And I had learned what that looked like partially by the leadership that I'd had over the many years, the things that I liked and didn't like about what I saw from those leaders. And so I think some of the bigger shifts have happened for me in terms of my perspective on leadership, probably starting around COVID timeframe. I mean, I think for a lot of us, everything changed then and has continued to change. And we've just had a series of like these moments that have caused us to shift and change our behavior. And I think it's more like me as a leader, I don't know that I have shifted and changed a whole lot in terms of my wholesale perspective. But if you think about COVID, it was like that forced everybody to be in this very empathetic, transparent, vulnerable zone that maybe some people weren't in before. And I've always kind of been that type of person. I don't feel like I have the energy to try to pretend to be someone other than who I am when I'm at work. So I've always held authenticity to be a really true and important value to me. But I do think COVID was that time where it was like, you can't hide from who you are anymore because it was all kind of right there for everyone to see. And we all had to be really vulnerable with each other because leaders are often supposed to have the answers, right? And no one had any answers at that point. And we were all really kind of scared. And I think it was the leaders that stepped up and acknowledged what they did and didn't know and sort of tried to still find a way to help their teams feel comfortable and go through that shift together. Those are the people that I think really showed up as true leaders in that moment. I actually switched jobs in May of 2020, which is kind of a wild thing to consider because I didn't know what was going on. But honestly, part of it was predicated on the fact of I didn't totally agree with the approach that I was being asked to take from an enablement perspective in terms of there was like this mentality of, well, people are home, and so they have all this time and bandwidth and energy to ingest enablement. And I was like, no, people are freaked out, and we need to actually think a little bit differently about how we do this. And so it was not just that, it was a time for me to make a change. And there were a number of things that pointed to it being a good time, but obviously stepping into a brand new team that I honestly, in almost 3 years at that company, never had an opportunity to meet those people in person, strangely enough. But, trying to build trust and work with this whole new team of people when everyone was in this, arguably one of the most bizarre and challenging times in our lives, was an interesting experience for me, and definitely helped me to grow and develop as a leader. And I think a lot of people just had to, because if you hadn't been in a situation of dealing with intense change and intense discomfort before, then we were all kind of there together, which is also, there's some comfort in that, right? That we were all going through it at the same time. But yeah, I think from that point on, we haven't necessarily gotten out of that mode, both from being in tech, and that company actually ended up going through its own series of changes and being acquired by private equity. So just more and more of that, like having to take a team through change and be thoughtful about how to build that level of trust, be transparent and open with people as much as you possibly could, but not to the point where you're scaring them and exposing them to too much of what's coming down the road. And also just being a little bit open and honest about when you didn't know what was coming or how to take people through things. So yeah, I think just what's been happening in the world for the past 5 years has really forced everyone to change their leadership style to some degree, but certainly the way that I think about it, I think about little moments like that, where we did a virtual sales kickoff at a company that I was at, and it happened to be the day of the insurrection. And I think we were about to do like a virtual magician was going to come on screen or something like that. And then we realized what was happening at the Capitol. And it was one of those like 9/11 like moments where you didn't know, was this a signal that there were things happening in other parts of the country? And it was really a scary moment. And so, just some of those things where you're learning in the moment and going, okay, how do we respond to this right now? Probably not the best time to have a magician show up on screen, and maybe we need to pivot and put out a message to the team that we acknowledge that people are probably a little bit freaked out right now, and let's put a pause on this thing. So.
Yeah. Well, with that last example, I think it shows like how important, flexibility, agility is as a leader. And additionally, it sounds like maybe your perspective didn't shift in the sense of you've always shown up authentic, recognizing how important it is to be vulnerable and empathetic as a leader. But maybe, in times of uncertainty, it's you recognizing the importance of role modeling that. So maybe it sounds like that's kind of something that was a thread throughout your time as a leader. Like you had it. How do you instill and enable that in other leaders as well?
Yep, absolutely. And it is, we live in a really ambiguous place. Like being in tech, often you're companies where things are changing and shifting on an ongoing basis, and the answers and even just like the nature of the work that needs to get done isn't laid out right in front of you, and you've got to do some problem solving. And for me, there's a lot of freedom in that and a lot of excitement in having the ability to chart your path. But for other people, that can be really scary, and it is trying to take people through that, and also have, realize those hard truths and have that conversation when it's like, maybe this isn't for you, this place that we're at we're right now, Braze is a 13-year-old company. We are very much in the teenage years. This is the third time I've been at a company that was sort of in that stage between 500 million and $1 billion in revenue. And there's a lot of constant shifting and reprioritization, and at times not quite as fun and exciting as it is to be part of a startup. And so there's a lot of those conversations that take place too, of like, that's not fun for everybody. And I find the fun and the freedom in it, but you have to kind of get real with people too, and help them through the cloudiness and the ambiguousness, but also ambiguity. I don't think ambiguousness is
it sounded right.
Right. I mean, I'm going to coin it, trademark ambiguousness. but yeah, having those conversations as well when you're like, this might just not be comfortable for you ever, because that sometimes is the case.
Yeah. Well, I imagine like you're so high up in the organization, and how do you like instill leaders to have those right conversations with their teams and like face uncertainty with that excitement and more of like with the growth mindset? How do you do that from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to anchor to the strategic priorities and imperatives of the business, and, help people to understand how that funnels down to what the team is responsible for and how we can be making an impact. So everything's about the outcome that we're trying to drive toward and how that ladders up to the outcome that the company's trying to drive toward. So it's like you try to crystallize it and make it clear for people as much as you can. But then I do think it's important to give people the autonomy to figure out what that looks like for them in their role specifically, and to give the leaders on my team the tools that they need to appropriately coach people to get there and to find those answers. And I do think that some of the tools and exercises that we've gone through with the Thoughtium team are really practical, helpful, useful ways of doing that as well.
Yeah, Amy, something that comes to mind as you share that, and I don't know if this is the perfect comparison, but I've been thinking a lot lately about, we talk a lot in the program we built around empathetic leadership and the power of empathy. And I think maybe like a realization I've had, and I've seen this happen to so many leaders, is like they mistake empathetic leadership for emotional leadership. And I think the challenge is like when times are going well, like they can kind of be the same thing. Like when you have good emotions in your leadership, like you can still show up like strategically thinking and maybe being open. But when times don't go so well and those emotions turn negative and those emotions turn destructive, like that's when the difference between empathetic and emotional leadership can be like very, very distinct. And I think a lot about, if you were to maybe use an analogy for what we try to do in the Braze program, it's like we're trying to give people this concept of a mental switchboard moment, which is like something's happening to me. And before I just go into my impulse, I have this toolkit and this set of different things I can do, which allows me to like switchboard into that style or into that thing I want to do. And even just having that second of a switchboard moment, which says like, I can step back. What does the situation require of me? Allows you to maybe not step into the emotional leadership. And I think that's what I'm gathering is more and more people are when they're faced with uncertainty, because people in the younger generations like haven't faced that much uncertainty as people leaders. Now that it's happening, that mistaking of emotional leadership and empathetic leadership could be happening more frequently.
Yeah. And sometimes I think that's a key responsibility that you have as a leader too, and easier said by someone who's been around for a long time, where I can draw from my experiences and say, there are always these market peaks and valleys, and you have people that are earlier in their career who may not have experienced those things. And it's so terrifying. And it's like, I promise you, we come out of these things, right? It's just read a history book, like it's gonna be okay. And so you can say that with some authority when you have been through those things. It's a little harder when you're trying to develop someone who's a new leader, because they can't necessarily draw from that direct experience. But I do think that's what's so cool about being a leader of leaders and helping people to find their own way to message that in a way that feels natural and authentic to them.
Yeah, well said.
Very well said. So Amy, you brought up, market signals constantly shifting and so forth. How do you think about building like enablement systems that can be responsive in real time, recognizing shifts will continue to happen?
Yeah, I mean, some of it comes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is just like leading with the outcome, laddering up to the objectives of the company. We are pretty OKR driven here. And so that's certainly one tactical way that we definitely solve for that. I will say, like, one of the things that's been really lovely about being a part of Braze that's unique to the past couple places that I've been is that when we put OKRs out at the beginning of the quarter, I always look back at the end of the quarter, and sure, we don't always hit all of them, and sometimes we're delayed or have reprioritized something, but for the most part, we're staying true to the things that we say we're focused on. And I think partially that's because they ladder up to those strategic priorities of the company, but also because we kind of leave enough room and make those goals big enough that within the goal, you can do a little bit of pivoting and it doesn't feel like you're completely wholesale shifting what you're focused on and people are getting whiplash and going like, wait a minute, I thought we were doing this thing. The other thing I've seen specifically in sales or go-to-market enablement is that a lot of times people will be so reactive to, either a buzzword or a new methodology or something that they think is drastically going to move the needle and change. And we've really stayed true to a lot of the kind of core methodologies and things that we rolled out a couple of years ago and try to continually reinforce and kind of get the innovation and the ways that we think free and about doing new things often hinges on those core things that we've done. So similar to we've rolled out the Thoughtium workshop to cohorts of leaders, and over time, as we do additional leadership enablement, whether it's something smaller in nature that we're building internally or whether we bring you all back, we'll always want to go back to those key principles and concepts that we've introduced. So I think that's super important to me as an enablement leader, is like not constantly introducing new, because we know that it takes, Grift probably has way more like stats on this that are basically rooted in scientific research. Full, a lot of repetition to actually learn something, try it, and do it well. And so that's where we really do try to focus on reinforcement and innovating through reinforcement as much as possible, I guess is the way I would phrase it.
Yeah, Amy, just kind of sitting alongside you all on the enablement side, what I think you all do a really good job of too is keeping those directions or those North Stars in mind, and then also being agile in how best to get to that endpoint. I think a lot of times people struggle because they think about where they're trying to go, and they marry themselves to that initial path that they set. And again, I think I think this is a Braze thing, but also just what I've seen your team do is the flexibility to recognize that there's still that North Star, that OKR that we're trying to help drive, but it might look a little different along the way. And like, how do we build enough contingency into how we might, roll this out that allows us to still get to that, but the path is going to be more curved than it is maybe straight.
Right. And things happen. We're in the midst of acquiring a company right now, and it's the first technology company that we've acquired. And obviously that's disrupted a lot of what we thought we were focused on. But it's also, we're approaching it from the perspective too of we were in the midst of evolving and innovating some of our thinking around our methodology and the ways that we sort of orient our value selling and value positioning across the customer life cycle. And so now it's like, okay, cool. We need to go through the steps that it takes to integrate this company into Braze once the acquisition is complete. And so we've got to prepare for that and all of the tactical aspects of what that looks like and all of the cultural aspects of making sure that we understand each other from a product and a people perspective. But then also, how do we fold this into our value selling orientation and think longer term about how that enhances our value proposition as a company. So it's, while that might feel like, oops, stop everything, and now this is all that we care about, it's like, nope, still plenty of other things in the works. And now we just think about how we continue, how we are going to operate as one very different company come probably about a month from now, or a little less than a month.
Griff, anything to share what comes to mind as Amy shares that?
I think Amy did a really good job of kind of talking about the ability to stay agile and stay pivotable. Is that a word? Pivotable?
Just making it work here today. I like it.
Yeah, it sounds good. I think maybe just you both know I love kind of like analogies is how my brain works. Like I think a lot of times when it comes to enablement, you kind of have your 5-degree changes, and then you have your 90-degree changes. And like if you were in a boat, right, you'd have to do a very different maneuver in a boat to change the 90-degree direction versus a 1-degree direction. So I think when it comes to the world of enablement, like an acquiring of a company is a bit of like maybe a 90-degree turn. It's like, well, like we're adding a brand new piece of technology to our tech stack that we sell. The messaging around this is going to have to be woven in. Are we going to be bringing in AEs from that company who now need to sell Braze? Is it just going to be Braze who's now selling that as part of the value selling method? So I think that those moments are much more disruptive in that we have to maybe rethink a lot of things. And then there were some of the smaller like changes, like, oh, hey, we're finding out that, we maybe need to help our AEs a bit with objection reframing. And that's not maybe something that changes the total course of the enablement strategy. But I think a lot of times people mistake like what are 1 degree and 90 degree, and they treat everything like a 90-degree turn. And then you find yourself like just going in circles, right? Like 90-degree turn after 90-degree turn before you know it, like you're back where you started. And so I think, like, again, I've seen Amy and team do this, and I see what good enablement teams know is sort of the degree of inflection they have to take when it comes to shifting, paths or strategies.
Yep. No, it's a great point.
So Amy, while you know that Grift loves analogies, I also love to build on his analogies. So we're going to continue on with this boat analogy and this idea of like pivoting with different degrees. So when we think of technological advancements in the world, specifically Gen AI, what sort of like pivot do you think is going to have to make in the space of enablement and leadership development?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's a lot in terms of just from an enablement perspective. There's so much opportunity to automate some of the things that slowed us down and enable us to innovate better. Grift, when you kind of did a demo for us a few weeks ago and we're talking about how you think about building simulations, someone on our team went and leveraged AI to like build a simulation exercise for something she was working on 2 days later. How cool is that? I was so excited to see it. And I was like, oh, great. So, there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of helping to speed up our rate of innovation from an enablement perspective. And we're really just starting to kind of unlock what's possible within our suite of tools in terms of how we can leverage those to better and more effectively serve up information to our go-to-market teams to help them be more productive and effective and efficient. From a leadership enablement perspective, I don't know. I mean, I do think, even just so Grift knows this, someone on our team recently up-leveled our internal competency model for our go-to-market teams. And so I think there's a great example of how you can leverage AI to, serve up some different prompts and have ChatGPT really helping to point you toward information in terms of how you might coach an individual, right? If we feed it the competency model, feed it a number of our internal assets and documents and training materials that are aligned to those competencies, like that's a really great way, I think, to help managers understand, like, if they don't see the vision for how they can help an individual, you can leverage AI to help guide that path and help you to prescribe a coaching path, I guess. So I think that's pretty interesting and exciting. But I guess I'm kind of old school in the sense of I do think that leadership enablement specifically happens in venues like the way that we rolled out our program with Thaudium, which was initially in a 2-day workshop. And I do think you've got in-person, cohort-based, where people then are broken into smaller groups. I just think nothing replaces that and what can happen in a scenario like that. So I do think that's really critical. And I feel really fortunate that the stakeholders that I work with, specifically our current head of sales, are really passionate about the value of bringing people in person and getting them together to have experiences like that. And similarly for some of the other enablement initiatives that we've rolled out. So obviously, a ton of what we do is virtual, but there's a time and a place where you just really can't get away from how important it is to bring people together in person to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. So this boat is not taking a full 90-degree pivot, maybe, but it's a little bit more than 5, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have to hold on to the railing, definitely. Yeah.
Maybe if you talk to someone younger than me, maybe. But I'm trying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because Amy, you and I talk about this a good amount, but I think like sometimes it's important to also think that like, what are some of the residual impacts of the enablement that we're trying to drive, and like we're not Yeah, the main goal of enablement and development is to help people become more proficient in some things, but also like it can have so much more of an impact. It can have impact on your culture. It can have impact on people's engagement. It can have an impact on just building like levels of connection across an organization. And I think sometimes when we get these amazing new shiny toys, like our first reaction is like all the things that it can make better, which is it can make things more efficient. It can make turnaround times a lot faster. It can make maybe exercises and interactions much more technologically sophisticated. And all those things are so true. And yet when we come down to leadership, it's like these are human oriented skills. They're trying to help you become better at influencing and working with other people. And yet we would do that just working with machines. Like it just kind of seems when you just put it that way, it kind of sounds a little ironic. And I think that there's like the residual impact is something we can't lose sight of losing those culture gains, of losing those innate engagement gains, those feelings of connection. Not to be too provocative or like, meta, but I mean, it's not crazy to say like the rise of technology is also correlated with the rise in loneliness in society. And like, maybe some of these things can be a little bit of a reprieve of that loneliness when you bring people together and you have them kind of talk about real challenges they're facing and trying to be, frankly, better human beings at work. So I say that obviously I'm a very biased person that this stuff matters to be in person, but I think I just ask people not to forget about the residual impacts that can be so powerful in doing things like disruptive in-person immersive experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also see like from a go-to-market enablement perspective, if you're an engineer, you can typically go off and learn most of what you need to learn by just digging in and getting hands-on in tools and reading documentation. That's not the nature of a salesperson, right? Salespeople want to also engage and talk to people and learn from them. And so even in a lot of the other enablement that we do, I just can't imagine replacing that, hearing from subject matter experts, hearing from your peers in terms of how they've done things like that. Some of those things just there's no replacement for. And I definitely feel like we have good jobs.
Yeah. It's kind of like Amy, it's kind of like technology enabled enablement, not technology only enablement, right?
Yep, absolutely. I do think it's helpful though, in the sense of, and I can say this because I was in sales for so long, like it's not in my nature to just go sit down and read 50 pages of documentation on something. Or if you think about doing account research as an account executive, I'm not going to read an entire 10K or 10Q, but I knew what to look for. But now using things like ChatGPT, it's pretty cool that you're just like, hey, I'm trying to find this out about this company and how I should approach them and what my positioning might sound like. That stuff's pretty incredible and useful for a seller specifically.
Very true. Well, I'd love to kind of do a soft pivot to the program that we rolled out for your folks in the go-to-market enablement team, Amy. Would love to hear from you, maybe just to give our viewers a headline of what the program was about, and maybe like what surprised you, whether that was about the participants, the content, and maybe yourself as a leader.
Maybe the charisma of the facilitators. I mean, however you want to take it.
Definitely not going to talk about that. I joke. Everyone loved Grift. One of our executive sponsor on this program actually referred to himself as a Grift fanboy. So there, Grift, I'll give you that one. So we, the thing that I really that shined through in the conversations with the Thoughtium team from the minute that we started talking, and what was something we were absolutely looking for, was that this was going to be highly curated toward what we were looking to do, and that they would do a ton of that you would do a ton of research and have discussions with people across the organization at different levels to understand really what was important to us. So I'll say, like, I brought a perspective when we started the conversations around what I thought mattered. I had already done some interviews and had my own point of view based on things that I'd seen in terms of what was going to be important. But it was great to see how the Thoughtium team really took their homework and also kind of helped us to pivot and shape what it would turn into. And it still held true to a lot of the things that we thought we wanted to solve for, but also had some additional elements that maybe we hadn't considered necessarily. So, some of the challenges that we were working with, they're not challenges, but just like what was interesting about what we were trying to do was, it was super important that we brought together all of those cross-functional roles across our go-to-market teams. Like many companies, I think there was maybe not quite the amount of empathy for some roles or understanding of what other people do even necessarily on a day-to-day basis. And so that was really helpful for us to think about bringing those teams together in a different way than they might interact on a day-to-day basis. So we knew that would be important and was something that we really wanted to do. It also presents a challenge because you're like, how do we make this work for everybody? How do we make this feel like it's useful and valid for everybody? And similarly, we had every level of leadership in the room. So from frontline leaders all the way up to the heads of departments. And so, first, second, and third line leaders for the most part. And also people that had completely varying degrees of experience as leaders. So some people that had been leaders for I think there were some people that like walked in the door having just been promoted into a leadership role, all the way up to people that had been leaders for, say 10 years or so. So no shortage of kind of nuances that we needed to accommodate for, and being an enablement, that always it's pretty hard to make everybody happy. But I think we did a pretty damn good job, to be honest. And I think some of that came down to, you've got a room full of people, but then in the sort of discussion groups and pods that you're putting people into, maybe you pair like leaders from a leveling perspective, but we did absolutely focus on mixing folks in those groups and getting people to work together in cross-functional ways that they may not have previously. So I'm not remembering all the things you asked in the question, but I think there was something about the level of surprises, but also a little bit of like, what were the core sort of topical areas that we were after? And I think some of it was like, we definitely, and this was something that was important to me, but also I think is probably a pretty standard Thoughtium operating practice, which is we focused on values, people's independent values and what matters to them. And I think that's a really useful way to sort of break down those, get people comfortable and vulnerable, and some people that maybe aren't typically that way. I actually heard a lot of people speak out loud in these rooms in the workshops that we were in about like, this isn't necessarily in my comfort zone and I'm not always this type of person. But there was a lot of commentary about what a safe space was created and how they really did feel much more comfortable speaking out in that way, which is huge. And then you have that comfort level with this group of people that you've now been through this with. So a lot of those kind of soft things that, if you were my boss and you asked me to put an ROI on this, like it's a little more touchy-feely than, but it's so important, especially when you're thinking about the business problems that we're trying to solve, and the fact that you can't do that in a silo. You can't just do that as one team or one department. You have to work with people and truly build an understanding of what they're up against, what they're working toward. And I think that if I were to point to one huge value that we've gotten out of this, it is that we've gotten consistent feedback of like, I never really understood exactly what that team does or what it might be like to lead a team that has that particular function. And now I do. And actually, I talk more to those people because I understand better how it'll help our customers if we work more closely together. And so there's a lot of kind of aha moments, I think, along those lines, and some really great exercises that Grift and team put together around, solving problems as a cross-functional team, and like actually sort of working through not a full simulation, but sort of a simulation of, if you're thinking about a business problem and breaking it down in terms of what that looks like from the outside world to inside of Braze to inside of your team, and how are you adapting and thinking about that as a leader and taking your teams through those things. It's some really meaningful moments, I think, that have happened in those rooms.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like people coming out of it with a lot more connection with the folks that they work or don't work closely with, transparency, empathy, collaboration. Grift, I'd love to pivot to you really quick and ask, what was behind the curtains in the design space for you? Yeah,
Well,
there's levels from leadership and from different levels, people just walking in the door. How did you go about designing a session like for them?
Well, I think, first off, I mean, that's as many variables as we're at play. I think it's a reminder, like, what a fun challenge we got to take on together, which is like, launching the first scale leadership development program for an organization that knew it was important, but hadn't maybe had the time to make the investment, and all these different levels and all these different regions need to be looked after. And so I think you can look at that like an oh shit moment, or you can look at it like, oh shit, this is amazing moment, where we can really like have some crazy amounts of value together. And I think, this is where I think you come back to the idea of when you build these programs and when you're able to leverage not just the idea of technology, but you take into your design toolkit everything that's there to utilize. And what I mean is there's the content, there's maybe the exercises, but there's also the how much you're going to focus on reflection versus how much you're going to focus on discussion versus how much you're going to focus on application and problem solving, and how might you actually organize the room depending on, are you focusing more on reflection and discussion? Are you focusing more on problem solving? And so, tactically in this experience, like something that we did was in the first day when we were focusing a bit more on reflection, it was a bit more about cross-functional groups, and it was a bit more about having people across level share their perspectives of values and coaching. And as we moved into the second day, we actually got them into leveled cross-functional groups, so they could talk about problems that they were having cross-functionally that might fit better at like their maybe their altitude of the business. And it's something that's simple, right? It's the same content, but when you take those additional design levers into your toolkit and you say, like, this is one thing we can change where it allows for us to have these two groups of people together and have a really impactful moment in 2 different days. I think that's just what we leaned into, was like the designer's perfect challenge, which is all these things together. And we have so many ways to orchestrate experiences that can really move the needle. So to me, it's the ultimate, when you get a request like this and you get a chance to partner with an organization who believes in the stuff, and you get a chance to really bring your full 100, like it's the best for us.
Yeah. And that's what I love too. I mean, I talk about this a lot, that it's, people are very different and not everyone is comfortable in that interactive group exercise. We do a ton of role play with salespeople, and by and large, you can expect that salespeople are comfortable doing that, and they're generally outgoing, extroverted people. But that's not always true, right? Sometimes you're an introverted extrovert, or and it is the reflection piece is super important. So I do feel like it was, versus sometimes in a 2-day workshop like that, you could be making someone uncomfortable the entire 2 days by putting them into that place of needing to collaborate in real time, whereas they are someone who needs to reflect more, think about how they're going to respond, and they had that opportunity as well. So I think even the people who admittedly were a little bit less, like I said, that vulnerable, open type of person, they were able to kind of like slowly work their way into some of those pieces throughout the experience, but also they had those moments to be like, oh, good, I can just sit here with my thoughts and actually like respond to this on my own in my head, versus having to like talk to all these people the whole time.
Yeah. And Amy and I talked about this, Nicole, but one of the things that I think is maybe like one of the biggest misdeeds of putting a program like this together is people just see it in these recurring chunks that just become very repeatable. Learn something, practice something, here's the takeaway. Mm-hmm. And when you start to have this very cyclical approach to how you put together a storyline, it blinds you from all the ways that you might make this into like picturing it as a story. Like, where are people coming in? And what's like that story that we want them to experience as they go through these 2 days and then beyond, as we think about some of these recurring connections. And when you are able to view it more that way, you start to recognize there are things much more in your control where you can change the room dynamics. You can change this being to a reflection versus this being a focus on a problem that you're solving. And I think that's what the beauty of this program was, is like we kind of aligned on what that storyline was going to be, so that when we were able to do it in fluid motion in the room, like no one in the room knows that it's happening besides us, but there's a clear story that we're building toward. And all those things that start more with reflection and more exploration, there's a reason that happens first and not at the end, so that when we get into more of the problem solving and more of the debate making conversations, there's all this trust and authenticity that's been built. So
the beauty behind it.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I don't think we even really talked about the fact that then to have those ongoing pods where these small groups were continuing the dialogue. So I think you did allude to the fact that it wasn't a one and done thing, but creating those points of connection for people to get together on a monthly basis. And it was really well timed for us because we were going through some big shifts with reorgs and just some change that happens typically at the beginning of every fiscal year. But this year it felt meaningful for especially certain groups. And I think having that group of people to lean on and talk through a lot of change management topics was really effective. And I think even though most of the folks, most of the cohorts have been through their sort of capstone final formal session together, they'll continue to talk and to have those connections that they built, which is really cool.
That's awesome. You can always count on Thaudium to bring the pull through, because the reinforcement's where the magic really happens, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, group, I know we could probably go on for a whole nother hour brainstorming topics here, but recognizing we're a little bit over time, but thank you, Amy, for joining us for episode 232 on Navigating Now. And Grift, it's always a pleasure to be hosting you. To our viewers, thank you all for listening in. We talked about leadership ROI through enablement programs, navigating uncertainty, and just the power of human connection and having in-person experiences. So we thank you all for tuning in. You can also join us every Thursday at thaudium.com/live.
And if I can say one more thing, sorry, Nicole. And Amy, thanks so much for doing this. And it's been such a fun and fun privilege to partner together what we've built. And thanks for coming on and spreading the good word about this podcast platform that I know you now will share to your entire network, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.